Good morning. It's March 16th, 2022, and welcome to Triggered. I'm Cory Morgan. We got a good packed show today, especially for political wonks. Boy, I mean, last night's by-election results were something else, and then I got some great guests coming up. Just that reminder, this is the Western Standards live daily show. We come to you at 11:30 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, Monday to Friday. And comments, of course, I want that interaction. Let's get back and forth. Comment to me, comment towards the guests, discuss things with each other. We just always want to keep it somewhat civil. We can get a little heated. We can get on each other's cases. Boy, I mean, people with some of their comments on my poor fashion sense are cutting. I cry myself to sleep occasionally, but I'll get over it. Constructive critique is welcome as well. So yes, on today's guests, I've got actually a respiratory specialist, Chris Schaefer, coming on. He's going to talk about impacts from masking. There really are impacts. We never talked much about it. Most of the mandates are dropping now, but now we just want to make sure they stay behind us. And he did some testing on things, and we're going to go into that and see how that goes. Now, after that, I have Conservative Party of Canada leadership candidate Pierre Poilievre. Everybody knows who Mr. Poilievre is, and we had a great talk about his campaign and what his plans are, and he speaks to a few direct things. It's quite revealing on where he wants to go. That race is just getting off the ground. It won't be finished until September 10th, and it sounds like we'll be talking to Mr. Poilievre a number of times. So he's kicking things off now, and he had a great talk with me. So I'm going to get into last night's by-election results in Fort McMurray-Lac la Biche. Now, it's hard to read too much into by-election results, so we try. It's a big, some very difficult tea leaves to deal with. They give us snapshots, though, of the electoral mood between elections. Last night's by-election in Fort McMurray-Lac la Biche was the only one we've seen, actually, since the general election in 2019. It's unusual to go so long without a seat opening up. Now, let's break down what we saw in the results. The turnout was about 24% of the eligible voters. This isn't unusual, unfortunately. They're rarely strongly engaged when it comes to by-elections, even though the parties are tossing everything they have at them. Now, I'm going to start in breaking down the winners and work down to the losers last night in descending order here. Brian Jean was clearly the winner in electoral numbers and in general, really. With 64% in the election, Jean comfortably won the seat. His campaign was odd in that it was against the leader of his own party. Jean rarely went into policy details, remained focused on the need to displace Jason Kenney as the UCP leader as soon as possible. Of course, Jean's been unapologetic that he has ambitions to run for leader if and when that job becomes open. So Jean's campaign was almost independent of the party itself, as the party really didn't direct a lot of resources or attention to that race up there in Fort McMurray-Lac la Biche. Understandably, Premier Kenney didn't want to see any more attention drawn to it than he had to. So Jean now has the seat, and the by-election's given him a springboard into a possible leadership race for the UCP. Now, that's going to all depend on the leadership review results in a few weeks from now. Jean's going to be using that seat as a platform to organize disgruntled MLAs and party members to get out and vote against Premier Kenney on April 9th in Red Deer. The NDP now, in the last night's by-election, were the clear loser. They'd been hoping to position themselves as a government in waiting. The by-election presented an opportunity to demonstrate that they've been gaining ground in the last 3 years. They threw everything but the kitchen sink at the race and finished with a weak 18.5% finish. They ran an experienced and well-known candidate with Ariana Mancini. She won 31% support in the 2015 election, but that's dropped down now to 18.5%. And that 18.5 is still 6% down from where they landed in the 2019 election as well. So while that riding isn't strong NDP country, they should have at least made some gains and inroads in the by-election. The drop in this support in this election does not bode well for Notley's NDP. They need to be making gains if they really actually do hope in the general election to be able to displace the party in power. Now, one that gets a little more difficult to read is Wildrose Independence Party leader Paul Hinman. He sort of won and he sort of lost in my view. The 11% showing was surely disappointing to Hinman, but it was a solid third. I mean, there were a number of other parties running, and they were, for the most part, they were struggling to garner 1% of the vote individually. It does establish the Wildrose Independence Party as the next conservative alternative for the UCP, but it does remain a distant one. As the leader of the party, it's a blow for Hinman. He tirelessly door knocked for months, which is much of why the Wildrose Independence Party wasn't down in the single digits like the other parties. His showing did show momentum and growth, but it wasn't a breakthrough result, and it's going to be hard to say that that was a great victory for the party at this point. And it was hard for the Wildrose Independence Party to capitalize on the anti-Kenney sentiment, as Jean had already wrapped that up. Going farther down, though, and we'll be talking more about that later on in the pipeline today, by the way. And it sounds like there may be some challenges for Paul's leadership coming from this. We'll see as the days wind up. The Alberta Party, for those who remember them, they've always been around. They lost terribly. They came in with 1.7% support. And while the media likes to give them a surprising amount of oxygen, they never really managed to get electoral results. They campaign on being everything to everybody by claiming ground on this mythical middle. It leads to them being nothing for nobody. And the Alberta Party, God, you see all these Alberta Party, Independence Party, this and that. It's hard to keep track of these days. They're experiencing some growth under the leadership of Greg Clark a few years ago when he won their lone seat in 2015. The party then took the sage guidance of good old Stephen Carter. Yes, that name that keeps surfacing. And they torpedoed their leader, Clark, out of the leadership, even though he had won their only seat. They installed Stephen Mandel as their leader and managed to get totally obliterated in the 2019 general election. Carter, of course, scurried off to the hills and later ended up working for Mayor Gondek for a few months until he got fired from there. They keep hiring him and they keep firing him. So under the new leadership of former Brooks Mayor Barry Morishita, the Alberta Party was hoping to make a splash in the by-election, but it was a flop. They can't claim a victory here. And they threw everything they had at that by-election. Now getting down to those other also rans, I guess is the term, the Independence Party of Alberta. And yes, one of their representatives contacted us, very upset that we weren't paying nearly enough attention to them. We didn't even actually quite know they were there. We didn't know they changed the name of their party. They didn't even have a campaign website for Fort Mac. You know, that would take 20 minutes to set up really with some of the templates out there. But I guess it's our fault because we didn't add them in our reader survey. Either way, they were nearly tied with the Alberta Advantage Party. Marilyn Burns runs that. With 24 votes for the Independence Party of Alberta and 25 votes for the Alberta Advantage Party. And I didn't misspeak. It's not percentages. That's the total votes they each had. These parties are non-entities run by people with chips on their shoulders over past political slights. Clearly, they aren't going anywhere soon. Now, a registered party is an asset, as it's difficult to get a party registered in Alberta. But for a registered party to fail to even garner more than 25 votes in an election is sad, to say the least. And hey, I can sympathize with Alberta alternative parties running on principle rather than an expectation to win. I've done it myself. With even a minor effort, though, a candidate should be able to at least garner a few hundred votes. Clearly, they didn't even try. Of course, still, the biggest loser of all today remains Jason Kenney. He had no way to win in the first place. It's just a matter of the degree or way he lost. If Hinman had won, it would have shaken the entire UCP and their confidence in Kenney's leadership. If the NDP had won, it would have shaken the entire province and their confidence in Kenney's leadership. Brian Jean won, and he will now be dedicating his time to shaking the UCP caucus's confidence in Kenney's leadership. But what can Kenney do? Kick Jean out of the party before he even assumes his seat? Jean won't even be officially sworn in until early April, but he's surely going to be coming to the legislature before then. Kenney had already been experiencing caucus discord and has tossed out members for it. With Jean, it's going to be right in the open, and he's going to be lighting fires in caucus. The by-election was a singular event, but the outcome was somewhat predictable. The big campaign now is in leading up to the April 9th leadership review of Jason Kenney's leadership of the UCP. The gloves are going to be coming off in the weeks to come, and we're going to see some of the most lively political maneuvering witnessed in generations. This is Kenney's last chance to hang on to the party leadership, and to be frank, it isn't looking very good for him. So that's where things are landing on that. Now let's bring in Dave Naylor to talk about more what's making the headlines in the news today, because it's another busy one. Hey, Dave, how's it going out there?
Good, Cory. Stephen Carter, that's a name from the past, eh?
I wish it would be from the past, but it keeps popping up and popping up.
Exactly. Hey, as viewers may or may not know, Western Standard has moved their world headquarters into a new facility. We've dropped down one floor. And you and I, while we have a nice kind of window to look out at, we're sort of cubicle buddies now. So I'm thinking we may need to set some ground rules because, to be honest, some of your crap is getting pretty close to my desk.
Well, we'll work on putting up some barriers and maybe some mouse traps and things to make sure we stay on each other's end of things. I'm certain we'll iron that out over the course of the next few months.
All right. So I don't want to spoil your entire show, but you were kind enough to give us a quick look at the Poilievre interview, and so we've got a couple stories from that up there at the moment on the website. So I encourage everybody to go and look at that. But I won't steal Cory's thunder by telling you what they are. But there is a lot of fallout this morning, Cory, from that by-election that you've talked about. The Wild Rose Independence Party president, Rick Northey, has released a statement saying he is launching an investigation into his own leader, Paul Hinman, and his efforts, not very good efforts, or not very, they didn't pay off. He worked very hard, but they didn't pay off in votes. And Rick Northey is basically saying we would have done better with a local candidate, and perhaps it wasn't up to Paul Hinman to try and insert himself into the race. So they've launched an investigation into that. And speaking of Jason Kenney's leadership, we've got a good story on some of the behind-the-scenes background that the UCP government is doing to try and keep him in power. They have ordered Kenney's staff and ministerial staff for every minister to give up 3 days of work, go on paid leave this week, and make phone calls on behalf of Kenney. They say they're going to supply the pizza for them to do it, but 3 days unpaid seems a fairly steep price to pay for me. What else we got on there? We got a good column from yourself, Cory, on defunding the police movement and all the good times that come along with that. More bad news for Canadian consumers this morning, Cory. Inflation is hit a 30-year high, 5.7% for the month of February, led by increases in gasoline and meat. And anybody who has tried to buy those things lately know that it's becoming more of a drain on your wallet. Got a story on our favorite corporation, CBC. Judge has slammed them in a defamation suit against a Manitoba businessman, ordering him to pay almost $250,000 in legal fees for the case. This is after the judge had already awarded the plaintiff $1.6 million for a completely wrong and biased CBC report. So $2 million of taxpayers' money gone down the drain there, Cory. So that's what we've got on there at the moment. Our Amber Brown is working on a touching story about children suffering cancer in the Ukraine. Just a terrible, terrible situation over there, and efforts to get them out of there and into Canadian hospitals so they can get treatment. So that'll be coming up shortly on the site, along with the rest of the day's news.
Great. And not to jump in and correct you, without need, but I believe you probably meant Amanda Brown, right? As opposed to Amber?
Yes. Thank you. I'm losing my mind, as you know.
I understand.
I'm so worried about your encroachment on my desk that I've completely lost the plot.
Well, I've been worried about catching COVID with your exposure to high-level COVID carriers such as Jean Charest in the recent weeks.
I know. He announced the other day he had COVID. I talked to him like 18 inches away on Thursday night. No masks on anybody, of course. That's fine. But we had a chat, and I was a bit worried I was going to get it. But so far, knock on wood, symptom-free.
All right. Well, I'm going to have to start thinking about more creative things to throw on that shared desk. And thanks for checking in with us today, Dave, and we'll talk to you later.
We'll see you later on Triggered, or on, told you I was losing my mind. See
you later pipeline today.
On the pipeline.
That's right. All right, Dave. But yeah, lots on the go and lots to watch. I mean, boy, of course, the horrific scene in Ukraine with the Russian invasion, and the stories just keep coming out of there. Federally, we've got that leadership race going. And as we said, now provincially, we've got this political hornet's nest on the go. And Brian Jean is going to be on the show tomorrow. Actually, I will talk to him, and we'll see what his plans are going forward. I mean, it's like levels and levels of campaigning. Now he's campaigned and won the by-election. He's going to be, if he can, running for the leadership of the UCP. But first, he has to ensure that there's an opening. So he's going to be campaigning hard to have Kenney, of course, kicked out of office. And that's interesting to hear from Dave. That's what I was talking about, some of the crazy political play and machinations we're going to see. So these staffers apparently all will go, and they'll have to be really careful with this. on unpaid leave. Because if they're paid, if it's government dollars going in to get those guys helping out on campaigning for the premier to win that partisan leadership review, there's going to be a bad explosion going on there. Though, I mean, Jason Kenney and his team are smart political players. I'm sure they're being careful enough to make sure that separation is in there. I mean, even if they're not getting direct compensation in dollars, come on, let's get real. Let's say you're a senior staffer for a cabinet minister, and you're voluntarily going to take a few days to help out for Premier Kenney. But what would happen if you decide not to volunteer? How long is your job trajectory after that? We understand the realities of political play and arm twisting. Again, you can never see it on the front, but we're going to see a lot of this going on. We've got a premier who's very desperate to keep his job, and we've got a whole lot of people very inspired to try and take him out of it, and it's just going to heat up more and more in coming days. Something that Dave talked about as well, and I mentioned with the protests going on in Calgary, and I talked about the defund the police crowd, because they are a bunch of wackos, and the behavior in City Hall yesterday was something else. I'm going to have actually Councillor Dan McLean coming on the show this Friday. He's one of the only ones who voted against sending that letter to the police commission to complain about their lack of beating down on peaceful protesters. But things are getting heated up out there, and Police Chief Neufeld was on the radio this morning, and he was referring to those protesters now as anti-democracy protesters. I'm not talking about the counter-protesters. I'm talking about the large group that does their march every week. So they're reframing the discussion. I mean, that's a purposeful thing. Those words mean something. The police, I think this weekend, they're going to start pushing back on those protests. And I've seen that the freedom protests are really doubling down and trying to get more people out than ever. The weather's going to be nice. I don't know what's going to happen with the counter protesters, but I got a feeling it's not going to be a quiet weekend in Calgary. Hopefully it's as peaceful as can be done in such an unusual and crazy situation, but it is really ramping up to something that could be troublesome, and I really hope it isn't so much in the news going on right now. And I am going to be coming out this Saturday to cover it, at least. I'm not taking part in these marches or anything, but the important thing to get to these things is get there firsthand, because there's counter protesters, there's protesters, there's police. There's almost three separate groups, and hopefully things don't go off the rails. But if they do, it always is every group pointing at the other one saying that they started it. And you can never tell when you only get a snapshot from this person or a snapshot from that person. You don't know. So I want to be there myself and see. And, I'm just going to report what I see. I mean, I've been supportive of the freedom protests, but if they're being a bunch of weenies and they start trouble with the police, or they go after those counter protesters, I will call them out. And likewise with the counter protesters or police. And again, let's just hope it stays safe. As I said the other day, I think it is time for these protesters to start moving into a different venue. It's getting tiring for the citizens who live down there. It's a residential area they march through. It's been week after week. The restrictions have been dropping. I understand they want to keep protesting, but it's time, I think, to move it to the federal building, to City Hall, to other areas, because it's just putting too much pressure. And now if this blows up and it turns into a bunch of arrests and possible injuries or property damage, public support is really going to drop for them. So I hope they're going to be proactive with it. Time will tell. Before I get to my guest there, Chris Schaefer, I see one of the commenters was looking forward to seeing him coming on. That's great. It's going to be an interesting talk. I should speak to, though, those folks who help pay our bills. I'm going to start talking about our sponsor, the Canada Shooting Sports Association. These guys have been sponsoring us for quite some time here at the Western Standard. We're an independent outlet. We rely on these advertisers and, of course, you great, fantastic subscribers out there. So the Canada Shooting Sports Association, these are a bunch of guys that their name says it all. They're an association of people who enjoy firearms legally, responsibly, safely, which most people do by far. But of course, you wouldn't believe that in listening to the Liberal government. I don't know if you've heard some of those horrible ads talking about firearm crime and the garbage and such. Either way, they have a lot of resources at the association for safe firearm use, even videos on things you can do and stuff like that, links to trade shows. But also they have legal challenges out there on behalf of firearm owners against the Liberal government, because what the Liberals keep doing is recategorizing firearms, turning legal firearm owners into illegal firearm owners, and then essentially forcing them to turn in their property. And it's not right, but they're going to get away with it if we don't stand up for ourselves as firearm owners. And these guys give the means. You got to get together. You got to push back with the legal system. And that's what we've got with the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Get on there, join on, take out a membership with them, and help them help you. Okay, so let's bring specialist. It's hard to describe. I was looking at his videos and such, but he's a specialist in safety and respiration and breathing, essentially, in workplace environments and other places. Chris Schaefer, and he's done a lot of work on this in the last couple of years, and it's really not been covered enough in some ways, I think. So let's bring Chris in here and start talking about masks. Hi, Chris. How you doing?
Hey, good, Cory. Thank you for bringing me in.
Oh, much appreciated. Glad to have you on today. So I did watch, I believe you've done a number of things, but there was one video I looked up, and it was where, let's get right into it with masking. You started measuring carbon dioxide levels within masks when people wore masks and face shields and things such as that. And they typically, it's not giving that free airflow that some people would imply when it comes to wearing masks.
Well, yeah, because essentially if you just, cover your mouth and nose with a closed cover, it's going to trap your carbon dioxide and it's going to force you to re-inhale it. And because there's no exhalation valve, it's going to cause you to re-inhale your carbon dioxide, which can cause a whole host of problems to the person wearing it.
Yeah, so I should have started with a bit of your background too. So you specialize in these sorts of things. Like if it was a workplace and they were concerned about the breathing conditions for their employees and workers and things like that, you're the type of person they would consult or speak to and study those things to make sure workers are safe?
Absolutely. So everything to do with air monitoring, gas monitoring, as well as fit testing for respirators, education for respirators. That's been my career for the past over 25 years now, strictly with that. And, it's all different types of respirators, something very basic all the way up to and including emergency responders that would go into biohazardous environments and everything in between.
Yeah. So with what you were covering, there's so many questions when it comes to masking. There's questions on whether they're even effective in reducing spread of transmission in the first place. And then the other part is, so what kind of harm can be done, though, if a person's inhaling too much carbon dioxide? Because a lot of people do still have been wearing masks for long periods of time in their workplaces for different reasons, whether it's a dusty environment or a medical environment or things such as that. And we don't hear a lot of reports of long-term damage with people from that.
Well, it's because it hasn't been a long time yet. It's still been a relatively short time. So just to give you an example, this is an example of a mask. Okay, why is it a mask? Because it has nostril holes and a mouth hole, not because it's on your face. So anything you put on your mouth and nose, if it's going to make breathing harder, then that's your first warning sign. So in order to design something that's going to provide respiratory protection and then also incorporate easy, effortless breathing, it takes a lot of money and a lot of engineering to do that. That is why we have what is called a respirator. So this would be your basic type respirator. Now, what makes it a respirator is, well, first of all, you got filtration protection right here from the filters, right? But if you take the filter off, the design of the device makes it a respirator. So for instance, you have an inhalation opening here, a big hole here. Through this hole, air flows in easily and effortlessly, and air is pushed out, and moisture and heat's pushed out through the exhalation valve effortlessly. So that something like this is actually designed and engineered for easy, safe breathing. So the issues of trapping carbon dioxide and causing low oxygen environments are not going to exist in a piece of equipment like this, because it's actually engineered for safe breathing.
Yeah. So with that two-way thing, we've been seeing some people talking about doubling, even tripling masks on yourself. I haven't even tried that with myself. I imagine you're going to strain your lungs trying to breathe in and out effectively when you've covered yourself in such a way.
Well, yeah. And, the standard here, the standard N95, this would be something that would have been something that was primarily used as a shield for healthcare workers, a shield for large drops and spray of mucus and bodily fluids from people in hospital or healthcare environments. It's never been used to filter viruses. It cannot filter viruses. It doesn't matter what you do. If you, there's nothing that you can use to filter viruses. There's nothing. I'll give you an example. This is an actual respirator designed for safe breathing, but even with the P100 protection on this, it's not going to protect you from viruses. Remember, these are N95s. N95 is the lowest level rating of respiratory protection there is. There's nothing lower than an N95. So it's impossible to think that any filter could stop a virus. It is not only impossible to think, it's completely ridiculous. So the thing to note that if you do cover your mouth and nose with a closed cover, it's going to make breathing more difficult. That's a sign your body's trying to tell you that, you know what, maybe this shouldn't be on your face, because a respirator is designed for easy engineered breathing, and they have visible openings in front of mouth and nose. So if you have something on your face and it doesn't have engineered visible openings in front of mouth and nose, it's likely a breathing barrier.
So you're breathing back and forth. You see some of the irony with a lot of the people who've been trying to characterize carbon dioxide as being a terrible pollutant that we got to get under control, but then they understate how bad it is for us to bring up our own personal carbon dioxide levels in breathing when we wear these masks.
Yeah, I mean, the levels that I've measured are far in excess of what would be considered safe. In fact, they would be considered hazardous by every regulatory body across the board, whether it's Alberta provincially, whether it's Canada nationally, whether it's North American regulations as well. So it's not safe within any regulation, and that's been totally overlooked. So people are so intent in thinking that by covering their mouth and nose, they're going to try and protect themselves against the virus, when in reality, the first requirement of any respirator is not to be filtration effective. It's to be safe to wear for breathing, to make sure that it's properly going to vent your exhaled carbon dioxide out of it so that you don't re-inhale it, because re-inhaling it can cause accumulations. It's no different than, Cory, when, we were taught by our parents not to put a bag over our heads. And we teach our children the same thing. If you just take a closed object, put over your mouth and nose, it's going to increase breathing resistance. That's not going to be safe for you to wear.
No, and then the other aspect and part of what you covered in your video, I mean, people talk about, well, medical personnel wear masks all the time and they do things, but that's, when you get into that too, a lot of people, of course, weren't trained in proper mask utilization. They aren't necessarily wearing it the right way or changing them out as frequently as you would have to in order for them to be effective. You point out if a person just got it wearing the same one all day and hanging it off their chin half a day, it's really not having any effect for them in a good way whatsoever.
Yeah, and I mean, technically, like I said, if it's a closed cover, it doesn't even meet the definition of a mask. Like I said, these things were introduced into healthcare primarily to act as a shield to protect the healthcare practitioner and from a spray from a patient. And, the patient from a spray from a healthcare practitioner in a mucus spray or bodily fluid spray. But as far as filtering viruses, let me give you an example, Cory, how ridiculous this is. A virus is so small that you would need one of the world's most powerful electron microscopes to even see that it exists, period. So that is why they don't make any respirators that can filter viruses, because they're too small. They're so small. They're you can't even fathom how small they are. So you think about somebody wearing, a piece of cloth, and you think about the pore openings on a piece of cloth or the pore openings on an N95 or any one of these covers. They're going to be larger. You can see light coming through, and you don't need an electron microscope to see that, which tells you that it is impossible to stop any virus. And people say, well, you know what, viruses travel in droplets, and it's going to stop all the droplets. And that's not true at all, because, viruses, because they're so small, the droplets are also really small. And the droplets are going to be not much bigger than the virus itself. And as a result, it's not going to have any effect whatsoever, except force you to re-inhale your exhaled air, cause hypoxia, and even potentially cause thrombosis. So thrombosis is circulatory blood clots. So basically how this works is this, Cory, is that there's many documented studies to prove, and I have lots of references. I'm actually building in the process of starting to build a very comprehensive website on all things mask related called maskexpert.ca. And I'm going to be building that shortly here. And it's going to have all the resources for everybody that can see all of the scientific studies that show that these are not safe to wear and really never really have been. And it's not really a new thing. There's studies that go by decades, scientific peer-reviewed studies that show that for a filtering apparatus, it's not an effective way to go.
Yeah, well, and I mean, some of the frustration, I mean, even some of the authorities are kind of admitting that it might not be as effective in stopping spread as they hope, but they kind of dismiss it and saying, well, but it's harmless. It won't do anything to you. I mean, not even as you're pointing out, there could be definitely some potential harm from re-inhaling your own breath and such. But I mean, the social harm, that it really doesn't get stated enough. People say it's just a minor inconvenience. I don't consider spending my whole days covered with a mask, not able to smile to people, communicate with people, and talk to people effectively to be a minor inconvenience, particularly when it comes to children in their social environments.
Yeah, like for me, I don't deal in the social aspects of it because I see so much hazard and then consequential. If you ignore a hazard, you're exposed to hazard long enough, harm is a natural consequence of that. So that's where my focus is. You're right; it's a multi-layer situation, but the actual harm and the hazard of it is proven, and different people will experience different consequences of it, and all anybody has to do is look up online and find out, what Google search or internet search, what is the danger of re-inhaling your exhaled air? What is the danger of a low oxygen environment? And both of these cause that. In fact, the measurements that I've done and other people have done, but I've done myself to verify for my own reports, is that the oxygen levels are lower and the carbon dioxide levels are higher than what would be permissible in any workplace environment. So imagine that we're forcing that on people that have children that require oxygen more frequently, they're going to suffer a lot more. People that are maybe have pre-existing medical conditions that are going to suffer a lot more from the reduced oxygen and high carbon dioxide than ordinary average persons. So there are definite hazards and there are definite harms, and it's going to affect different people differently. And time will tell for the long-term consequences of that.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be dismissed. I mean, if you've got OH&S regulations that say if your carbon dioxide levels in the workplace are this high, you have to get the workers out of there and you have to change the ventilation to address it. Why is it not reasonable to say, well, when we're causing people to breathe out those sorts of levels through a mask, that this could be problematic? Yet they dismiss any discussion of that whatsoever.
Well, I think this is a really unique situation because in the last 2 decades, more than 2 decades, I've worked with government for more than 2 decades in all different departments. And I would say that this is the first time in history that there's been such a respiratory emergency where they need respiratory protection, where somebody like myself has been ignored and has not been invited to the table for discussion and consultation. It's the first time in history, and it's not just me. There's others like me as well, where we have just been. It's been rolled out around the world, especially in Canada, Alberta, wherever else, and it's been done without the consultation of actual respirator experts.
Yeah, well, and I think, getting to the political end of things, which is more my turf, what happens with a lot of governments is what becomes more important is to look like you're doing something, even if it isn't necessarily effective. And masks are a good, as far as they're concerned, quick, easy way to have visible legislation where you can see what's happening with it and make some people feel that the government has been doing something to protect them from themselves and each other. Thus, they jump onto it, even if the evidence isn't really terribly strong to support using those masks in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, like the call of masks is really not in actuality the correct terminology for it because it doesn't have engineered breathing openings that are visible for air to easily pass in and out. So the actual more correct term that I've coined for these devices that were mandated, that are now repealed, thank God, but that were mandated are breathing barriers. And I think breathing barrier is a more accurate description of what these closed covers actually do.
Well, that's it. And some people have been saying, why are we discussing this? The mandates are dropping, it's going away. But we can't forget then we got to learn from what's happened. And we know that if infections starting to rise, the governments will, on a drop of a hat, reimpose all of those mandates unless we kind of establish that these aren't the way to go. This isn't how to protect people, or perhaps they are. I mean, the discussion's open and it hasn't been a two-way discussion so far. So that's why I wanted to get you on to explain some of these things. I mean, we shouldn't just be, bringing those mandates back in unless we got some very solid evidence that they, for one, of course, are not going to harm people and that they offer much benefit. We haven't seen a lot of either, I'm afraid.
Absolutely, a lot of changes have to occur, and you're right. What can be taken away can be brought back, and it's important that the public is given the best information and the best protection, but also not to do something that's going to cause more harm than nothing.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you coming on to explain a bit of that today. As I said, we just haven't heard enough of that side and people looking into it. In the whole pandemic in general, there just has not been enough nuanced cost benefit discussion when it came to mandates overall. I mean, on every level. So I do appreciate you getting out there and offering, evidence. I mean, you're not just giving a point of view. You have a video demonstrating your tests and other such things to show how the masks have been impacting people. So where can people find more information on what you're doing, Chris, and see what you've done in the past?
Well, like I said, I'm building a website right now, maskexpert.ca. It's going to have all the resources, not just mine, but all resources from around the world, government resources on everything you can imagine. It's going to be readable in multiple languages. It's quite an intense project, and I'll be doing a little bit of raise a little bit of money to help me out on that with Give, Send, Go right away. To see if we can build this really quick and make it comprehensive and complete for everybody. So I also have some videos like on Rumble and BitChute people have put on. YouTube is not a fan of mine, and that's okay because I'm not really a big fan of YouTube either. So, but I would say for the most part, all my resources will soon be on maskexpert.ca.
Great. Well, thanks for coming on to talk to us today, Chris. A lot of people are still very concerned about this, and I appreciate just the common sense approach and the update on things. So hopefully, perhaps we'll talk again soon once you got your site up and running.
Sounds good, Cory. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Chris. So yeah, that was Chris Schaefer, and you can look him up. You start Googling, he's quite easy to track down. And as I said, there were some great demonstration videos that are out there and things such as that. It's a discussion worth having. There's so many discussions that just weren't happening in general. I mean, as I said, the cost benefit, it's been out of whack since day one, particularly when it came to lockdowns as well. I mean, they kept talking about this benefit of slowing this infection rates, yet ignoring the amount of damage being done by crushing businesses, by putting people under stress, by deferring medical treatment in hospitals because you've locked people out. All of those things, they undercut that, but all they talk about is the potential benefits of the lockdowns in the first place. We need to look at both sides, especially when we're going to impose possible things upon people. I'm going to talk quickly about another one of our sponsors before I talk about a little more news, and then we'll get on to Mr. Poilievre. And let's talk about Bitcoin Well. These guys have been one of our sponsors for quite some time, and they are very good. We're in these times. One of the things that Poilievre does talk about a lot actually is inflation. It's been crazy. Our dollars aren't worth nearly what they used to be because the government is busy printing them and borrowing them and issuing bonds on them faster than the market can keep up with. And it's only going to get worse. So, I mean, look for ways, digital currencies to hedge your bets, get out of that fiat currency market. Bitcoin Well, what these guys are a service that will lead you into the digital currency world. I mean, they're explanatory, they're local, they are a Western Canadian company, they're publicly traded, and they'll help show you how you can get started in it. Because if you've never taken part in digital currencies, it can seem pretty complicated or overwhelming. Well, these guys give one-on-one personal service. They'll talk to you about it. I mean, maybe even Bitcoin isn't for you. Well, this is the way to find out. You want to look into it, and they will help you out. And your money is always safe. With these guys, Bitcoin Well never has your Bitcoin. They don't have your money. They facilitate your participation in the digital market. It's always in your wallet and in your control, because that's where some scams unfortunately do happen occasionally, is with other outfits where you give them your money and they invest on your behalf. So check them out, bitcoinwell.com, and take control of your money. All right. Now, I just want to mention Micah was talking about with the protests, it being a right and it wasn't a problem until the counter protesters showed up. Absolutely. I said that in the column I posted on it as well. But whether right or wrong, I just concern myself about how things escalate. And I understand the point of a protest is to inconvenience people and catch their attention. But who do you want to inconvenience? I mean, these are citizens in the Beltline now at this point. They don't have much impact on government policy. I know it's not exactly going to impact the government much if you're in City Hall steps or the Harry Hayes building either. But at least you'll be able to continue to express if you're going out there. Remember, the government's always looking for an excuse to crack down, always. And if they get a conflict, as I said, Chief Neufeld is already changing the language. He's calling them now, calling you. I know a lot of these people on here are the protesters who go out, the demonstrators. And I've been there and I've reported repeatedly, it's peaceful, it's fantastic. But now they're calling it the anti-democracy protesters. They're trying to cut public support away from the protesters. And if there is a conflict between the protesters and the police, or the protesters and the counter-protesters, if property starts getting damaged, if people start getting hurt, the government is going to come in like a freight train. I'm telling you right now. And sometimes it's better to show a little compromise, move to a new location. That's all I'm saying. You're not gonna, and understand that. That's why I'm going down there this Saturday, and I'll watch. But I hope there's a vent for the pressure, guys. I mean, protests are important, but you can overreach and you can overstep, and then it can provoke those people who don't want you to have that right to protest to have an excuse to step in on it. So I'm really worried about that. That's part of why I'm talking about it. It's not like I'm saying I have a problem with the protests, but I think it's evolved to a point where they got to consider going somewhere else for these rallies, because it's going to come to perhaps a very bad ending, and I don't want to see that. Let's look at some of these things. Speaking of money and your freedoms and the big government, this is an interesting story. Banks are eligible for taxpayers' subsidies under a Freedom Convoy compensation fund for small business. Oh yeah, yes. So they've made a little fund for small businesses. That they said that were harmed by the Freedom Convoy. Some of the businesses were shut down in Ottawa. I don't know if they needed to or not, but they were. It did cost the money. The government's going to shore that up. Fine. Now the banks qualify for it too. Oh yes, here we go. Our banks, with all that money they're making, our banks that went right out there under government guidance and seized people's bank accounts, seized their money, seized their property. Well, the banks are actually going to get bailed out for their efforts in it. Isn't that cool? This is your tax dollars at work. Again, this is why I'm talking about getting your money separate from the old ways. We can't trust them. Look at that. So there was a $20 million downtown Ottawa business relief program, and they opened applications. And the Treasury Board in a statement said the program will pay $10,000 in federal compensation for specific types of losses. Well, the banks qualify for it, so they're actually going to get some extra bucks due to the Freedom Convoys. Good work, guys. Again, this is where our tax dollars go. Speaking of which, as Dave mentioned too, the Mother Corp, the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, Pravda. And they're breaking new records. They've set a new record. They've been ordered to pay more than $250,000 in legal costs in what's now the costliest defamation case in Manitoba history. That judge, noted over and over that the Crown broadcaster failed in its duty, and I'll say the state broadcaster. They always chafe when I say that, but it's the truth. Failed in its duty to be fair, balanced, and responsible, which is hardly new. The problem is they went after somebody who pushed back this time. They took their reprehensible crap coverage and they attacked somebody, and that guy didn't take it. And now they are paying the bill. But the unfortunate thing is it's a mixed victory. So in the end, it's a $295,000 legal bill that the network has to pay, but they got to pay $1.66 million in damages they're awarded earlier. But of course, that comes out of our pocket in the end because they are a tax-funded institution. So we get to foot that bill in the long run. And man, this is an institution that should know better. Look at the amount of money they get, $1.5 billion a year. Plus and I call it theft. You steal advertising from the private market. Because if you're a company that's already getting $1.5 billion a year, you can undercut private broadcasters by putting out advertising space, at a fraction of the cost. Even if it's a comparable cost, it doesn't matter. You shouldn't be doing any bloody advertising at all if you're getting that many tax dollars in the first place. And it takes those out of the market for the other private broadcasters, which I think the government likes anyways. They want the private broadcasters to be reliant on government money, just like the CBC. That's why they're always bailing them out. That's why they're always coming up with those subsidies. I like to remind everybody, it was a great story from Derek, and it was fantastic. I love what he did. He went through the whole application process to become a approved media source in Canada. Yeah, there's a process for it. Government approved. He said, yes, we recognize you as a media source. How kind of you. We didn't really want their permission. But it showed that we could pass through all those hoops and jump through those hoops and do it. And he did that. And then the next question, I guess, from the bureaucrats is, okay, so you're ready to start applying for all the subsidies you now qualify for? It's no. We just wanted to see if we could. I guess that kind of upset them. But you can't be independent if you're getting funding from somewhere else. That's the reality of it. And I should remind everybody that our other source, and I want to thank everybody, I got to go through that in the show, is our subscribers. And they've been fantastic. They've been growing at a magnificent rate over this last few months. Because the media has been so horrible, people have been looking for new sources. That's part of why Dave mixed up the name of one of the reporters earlier today. We're gaining them so fast and hiring and spreading out our coverage that it's hard even for our news editor to keep up sometimes. And that's a lot due to our subscribers. So if you haven't subscribed yet, though, please get on there. Take a subscription at westernstandardonline.com/membership. It's $10 a month. If you take it out for a year, it's $99. If you use the coupon code TRIGGERED, you get another $10 off. Hey, we're all about saving money here. I understand that. Ask Jane. I'm a cheap guy. Get on there, use that coupon code. And you know, it's a free trial for 2 weeks. You got nothing to lose. You get past the paywall. You see all of the columns. You see the news stories as they break, as they're written. And it's unhindered. And when people take out that 2-week trial, the conversion rate, once it comes to the end of saying, okay, now you got to pay the bill and carry on, 95% of people say, yes, this is worth my $10 a month. I'm going to stick with it. And they stick with it. And we appreciate that. And that helps us as well get other subscribers. As I said, too, you can buy subscriptions for other people. You can buy it on their behalf, whether they're people you think would like it, or if you even want to buy it because you think they need to see it and they wouldn't like it. You know, the crazy lefty uncle or something that disrupts all your dinners and family gatherings. Give them a Western Standards subscription. Maybe we can get some common sense into them yet. We also have corporate plans, you know, so if you got a company, you want to buy one, reach out to me. We could talk about that. You can get a bulk buy membership corporate plan and buy memberships and subscriptions for your employees. We got a few companies doing that already. So that way your employees are all getting access to some good information. A nice little benefit you can offer them. So yes, thank you to the subscribers who've already subscribed. And hey, if you haven't already, come on, get on board. So what else are we going to hit here before we get to Mr. Poilievre? Yeah, I'll expand a little more on that case, I guess, with the CBC. There's some of our slow courts, unfortunately. So CBC, when they managed to get into the soup, that was actually from 2012 with stories they did on an investment advisor. And he had won an award for the Wealth Management Practice of the Year. And they started a whole thing with a picture of this gentleman with the headline saying, "Is your money safe? Our top story tonight has to do with your hard-earned savings." Can you imagine as an investment advisor having a headline like that come out? Of course that's damaging. That's hugely damaging. Investment advisors, it's all about trust. It's important because there have been some unfortunate, unscrupulous criminal investment advisors out there. Yeah, we know about Madoff and some of the other things. But I mean, most of them are honest. And when you get something like that happen from the state broadcaster, you're damn right it hurt that guy. It's too bad it took 10 years to get it settled. That's another thing we got to finish fix in this country is our ever agonizingly slow justice system. It's painful, and it's the process is the punishment. That's the thing with taking 10 years in this suit. I think again, a lot of the government lines up. They just want to tire these guys out and make them give up rather than stand up for themselves. But he pushed, he stuck with it, and he got almost $2 million out of the CBC. But I mean, I'm certain he would rather have just been left alone in the first place so he could carry on his business. But the state broadcaster, unfortunately, didn't want to let him do that. Another news item that popped up yesterday, again, the political machinations going on in Alberta in the nomination races. Tim Hoven, who was running for the nomination in Rocky Mountain House, just west of Red Deer, where that leadership review is going to have, and he sold apparently well over 1,000 memberships. He got disqualified on very shaky grounds. He did appeal it, and unsurprisingly, the United Conservative Party has completely rejected his appeal. And the UCP executive director wrote, "The rejection of your application is now final and binding." So, so much for that for Mr. Hoven. That's finished. I spoke to Jody Gateman the other day too, and she unfortunately had her character terribly assassinated by none other than the premier and some others. Again, over just the weakest of links on social media. Whereas Jody was apparently qualified and respectable enough to be able to sit on the board. She was elected as a councillor down south, but now suddenly when running for a UCP nomination against an incumbent, suddenly we find these old social media things which weren't even all that bad and say, no, we can't have you. Come on, guys. We can see through that. The weeks are counting down. We're only a few weeks away from that Red Deer event. And I tell you, we're going to see a lot more stuff rising and bubbling as the establishment gets desperate. Of course, I do always love watching an establishment get desperate. They need to be scared sometimes. Though a lot of people worry about the disorder that's coming throughout the party in itself. We're talking about now there's challenges to Paul Heyman's leadership on a smaller level. It sounds like on the Wild Rose Independence Party, it's coming from his own president. Conservatives, we do love to eat our own. That's one of the areas where we have always had a hard time moving forward and getting things done. Is we are infighting, we're on each other's necks. I think part of it's just our nature as well, though. I mean, if you're a lefty, you're naturally a follower. You will do as you're told. And conservatives are all individuals. They're individualists, and they want to be left alone. But that makes them a lot harder to lead. That makes central leadership more difficult to keep going. The reason you don't see eruptions in Rachel Notley's party from within right now, and you can bet there's ambitious people who want to move up in there, is because it's a party full of followers, not leaders. So they won't push on her back. And she gets away with that because some of them got to be getting tired. Same with Jagmeet Singh. The farther left they go, the more entrenched they are with believing they should just be controlled by a singular individual or dictator. So let's get on to federal leadership really quickly here then with somebody who's running, and he is the one who's kind of shaking the establishment a bit, and that's Pierre Poilievre. He's from Ontario. Most of us already know him. He's been a member of parliament for a number of years out there in Carleton, and he is at this point, I think we can safely say the front runner for the Conservative Party of Canada leadership. Though there's a lot of contenders all starting to line up, and that can change. It doesn't go until September 10th. But this is the first of what sounds like there's going to be a few interviews with leadership candidates and Mr. Poilievre as well. And tune in and let's see what he's got to say. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Mr. Poilievre. It's been a pretty lively campaign for you so far, I imagine, and we appreciate you speaking to our viewers out here in the West.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me on the show.
So I'll get right to it. One of the themes I see in general right now from a lot of people when it comes to government or the party as well and things like that is trust. People don't feel very trusting of government and politicians. I mean, that's sort of always kind of been happening. But in these tumultuous times, we've had a lot of that. And I did ask some of our viewers to send questions. And one from Dale Grab was about accountability. Like with the last leadership, we don't need to go into so much of that. But the candidate sort of proposed a lot of things one way and then didn't follow through later on, which I think kind of led to the change in leadership. But what sort of measures could we put in to ensure accountability in matters of transparency or even potential recall?
Are you talking about within the government itself or within the Conservative Party apparatus for its leadership?
There are two levels. Yeah, I packed a lot into that, I'm afraid. Well, in the leadership and so on, your accountability would be to the members, and you're running kind of for two positions right now. So there's mechanisms within the party, and we saw those exercised recently. But I would like to talk about the potential Pierre Poilievre Prime Minister. What kind of measures could we bring in then to feel that you would be following through on your word on the way up and following after that, I guess?
Well, I was the parliamentary secretary in the Harper government that ushered the Accountability Act through Canada's parliament. That was the toughest anti-corruption law in Canadian history, still is. In fact, the scandals that have ensnared Trudeau are all the result of breaking that law. It expanded access to information, separated the prosecution arm from the political arm of government. It banned politicians from taking gifts from people with whom they have government business, something the Prime Minister was also found guilty of doing. And later on in this campaign, I will be announcing new measures to get tough on corruption and expand accountability to empower citizens to hold bureaucrats and politicians accountable when they may waste money or defraud the public treasury. So I believe the government is servant and the citizen master, and that is what I will enact when I'm Prime Minister.
Okay, so when it comes to that transparency, I've noticed like Blacklock's reporter has been very effective actually in coming out some of those committee hearings and things like that, but sometimes they still hit a wall of redacted stuff or the old, toss a giant bill for an information inquiry. So would there be an intention to make it a little easier to get in and check on our government?
Yes, absolutely. I want to give more power for access to information and more proactive disclosure of government decisions and expenditures so that people know where their money is going and can trace every penny. There's no reason why with the modern technology, we can't have easily traceable government spending. so that we can follow not just the dollar, but right down to the penny, what is spent and where it went. And that's the kind of transparency that I will enact as Prime Minister.
Great. And then maybe I'll move a bit back towards the partisan end of things. A problem we have as conservatives in general, and as we've seen a lot of conservative leaders lately, it seems, haven't resigned from their positions, choosing to retire. They've been pulled down by upset party members. And we're certainly in the midst of quite a bit of turmoil in Alberta with our provincial leadership right now. So this leadership race has already gotten off, to a heated start, and that's fine to be lively, I guess. But we do also worry that it might turn into something that could be fractious. So how can you maintain this race while differentiating yourself from other candidates, but not letting it get too divisive?
Well, everything my campaign has said about the other candidates is just factual and on the public record. Patrick Brown supports a carbon tax. He actually endorsed Justin Trudeau's version of the carbon tax and said he would impose it in Ontario. It is a public fact that Brown, like Trudeau, has been twice convicted of breaking the ethics law, in his case, the Ontario ethics law. And he's already attacking Stephen Harper, something Trudeau does as well. So I just disagree with him and that approach. Jean Charest was a Liberal premier who raised taxes, brought in a carbon tax, attacked Stephen Harper, and endorsed a long gun registry. So I disagree with those policies, and I think it's better to have those disagreements out in the open rather than have these two who are in a coalition together sneak into the leadership by hiding what they really believe and then thrusting a big surprise on party members after the fact. Your second part of your question was, how do we unite? Simple. We unite around one core principle: freedom. All conservatives can endorse that principle. Social conservatives want religious freedom and freedom to preach without censorship. Progressive conservatives want the freedom for women, gays, minorities, and others to live their lives in equality and without government interference. Fiscal conservatives want economic freedom to control their own money, start businesses without government blocking them. Libertarians want freedom online, freedom to own cryptographic assets and to express themselves. Rural and firearms conservatives want the freedom to own their property lawfully and without undue confiscation. So these freedoms bind all different conservatives back together. And so I will unite conservatives around freedom. And that's how I will bring together the country to become Prime Minister.
Okay, so we've seen a time when our in exceptional circumstances, our civil liberties have been challenged more than we've seen in our lifetimes, whether it was through pandemic legislations, ostensibly to control the pandemic, fair enough. And then with the short invocation of the Emergencies Act, how can we be assured, though, that, I understand the reason for an Emergencies Act is sometimes you just get something that's beyond the pale. But we want to make sure it's absolutely the very possible last resort for a government to go to. And people's confidence, I think, has been a bit shaken.
It has indeed. Trudeau is on a pandemic power trip. He caused this emergency by targeting truckers with a ridiculous new mandate that they had worked safely without for 2 prior years, even though they are the very people least likely to spread any kind of virus because they're all alone in a truck all day and all night, sleeping and driving. And he did it at a time when the rest of the world was lifting mandates and restrictions. So he deliberately provoked that crisis. And then he used the crisis he provoked to invoke more, to give himself yet more powers. I've been calling out Trudeau's pandemic power trip for 2 years, since March of 2020. I was probably the leading voice against his attempt to give himself the power to raise any tax to any level for any reason without parliamentary approval back when the pandemic first started. I fought against his abuse of tax money in the WE scandal, and I fought against his attempt to regulate internet speech and helped Rachel Thomas from Lethbridge stop that bill in its tracks before the last election. So I've been fighting for freedom against Trudeau's pandemic power trip since the COVID crisis began. And I continue to do that as now the leading voice to end all mandates and restrictions so Canadians can take back control of their lives.
So getting to that freedom and an important part of transparency, independent media like ours has been on the rise, and it's been turning into an alternative. You've already committed to defunding the CBC, which is appreciated, but we're worried a lot. We've got Bill C-11, I believe, that's coming forward now. That there seems to be quite a move on to strangle the growth and development of alternative media sources out there. Would you act to protect those?
Yes, I led the charge against C10, which was the forerunner to what is now C11. Well, I should give more credit to Rachel Thomas because she was the one who pushed, she was the critic, and I worked with her to stop that horrible bill. And it's really unfortunate that the government-backed media and the corporate media want this bill to go ahead because it will further entrench their oligopoly on speech. They are acting as gatekeepers. They want to keep out the competition so that they can control what's reported and basically guarantee that it's government talking points that Canadians hear without alternative voices getting a hearing. That's why the media in the press gallery is so hard on me, because I'm fighting against their gatekeeping and in favor of freedom of expression and freedom of competition in the media. So yes, I will repeal C11 and I will repeal other bills if they pass that Trudeau is proposing to curtail what you see and say online.
Well, it's comforting to know. I mean, it's so important that we have these means to communicate. I mean, I understand there's a lot of misinformation out there, but we can leave it to citizens to determine what's
frankly, there's a lot of misinformation in the corporate and government media as well.
Absolutely.
There's a tremendous amount of disinformation that the press gallery publishes. So we want to get rid of disinformation. Let's start with ending that.
Great. So, I mean, we're coming from the West, of course. We're the Western Standard. We got a lot of Central Canadian listeners, but regional challenges and equity have long been an issue for us out here, of course. And I'm of the old bent of the Reform Party way back when, and Senate reform was a very large issue for us. I mean, the Senate right now is supposed to address regional inequity, but realistically, it's terribly imbalanced. Would you consider looking into reforming the Senate? I mean, seriously reforming it, not just perhaps tweaking it here and there.
Well, the truth is, I don't think it will happen. I'm just being blunt with you. Like, I don't want to be one of those politicians that comes on air and tells you a bunch of stuff just to get your vote and then goes back on it. The Supreme Court ruled that abolishing the Senate requires 10 of 10 provinces. Even reforming it would require 7 provinces representing 50% of the population. We'd have to open the Constitution, which would begin a whole new can of worms about every other grievance that people have with the constitutional structure of the nation. And I don't think we would get to a consensus. I don't like the fact that our Senate is unelected. I fought for an elected Senate. In fact, when I was a teenager, I worked on the Senate election campaign of Ted Morton when the Alberta government was promoting Senate elections. And I helped him as a volunteer at McMahon Stadium in Calgary, collecting signatures for him to run. So that's how far back my arguments for Senate democratization goes. What I would support is appointing the winners of elections that provincial governments hold in their provinces. So I would appoint the candidates that Albertans elect in their locally held vote. If any other province held similar elections, I would appoint the winner in those cases as well. So that's something doable, doesn't require constitutional change, and I want to promise only things I can actually do.
Good. That was the next question. I was going to ask if you would commit to appointing the ones we elect, because we do have some senators elect right now.
Yes.
I'm sure vacancies will be
coming. Should be appointed. They should be appointed. The elected ones should get an appointment to the
Senate. It's the best we can do without reforming the entire system. I know constitutional change is very difficult. I'll get to some familiar territory. Inflation, of course, is going wild. It's running rampant. There's a number of factors. I mean, government spending is a huge part of it, and borrowing, the energy costs as well. So in addressing inflation, though, I mean, how can we get that under control reasonably?
Well, 3 things. Let's start with what I call just inflation. When Trudeau started printing money to finance the $500 billion he's had in the last 2 years, I predicted we have inflation. Why? Because throughout thousands of years of history, whenever dictators, emperors, prime ministers, presidents print money to pay their bills, create coins out of cheap copper, as they used to do, to pay for their opulent spending, they end up causing inflation. Why? Because more dollars chase fewer goods, which leads to higher prices. It's not rocket science. So I said this would happen. Now, so the first, that's what I call just inflation. So how would I stop that? Well, I'll phase out the deficit, cancel the $100 billion slush fund of spending Trudeau is promising, defund the CBC, cancel the infrastructure bank, which is a colossal boondoggle, and also root out other waste and mismanagement to get rid of our deficit. So there is no need for money printing. Secondly, I would axe the carbon tax. John Charest, Patrick Brown passionately support the carbon tax. They want higher gas prices as a stated policy objective. And of course, the Bank of Canada governor admitted this week that the carbon tax is adding to inflation. I would axe that tax to bring inflation down. And the third thing is, instead of creating cash, my free enterprise economy will create more of what cash buys. I'll remove the regulatory gatekeepers to produce more Canadian energy, to reduce taxes and regulation on our farmers so they can produce more affordable food. And I'll incentivize municipalities and sell off, as well as selling off 15% of federal buildings to turn into more housing, to get the regulatory gatekeepers who block housing construction out of the way and increase the supply by millions of housing units so that there's more housing to have. So in other words, stop printing cash and start creating more of what cash buys. That's my common sense solution to just inflation.
Okay, would deregulating some of the agricultural controls that do lead to inflation involve supply management? I mean, that's been proven to raise the cost of a lot of consumer staples with dairy goods and poultry products and such. And it was a large part of the past Conservative leadership discussions.
I'm not proposing a change in that area. And the reason is that the farmers who own the quota have had to pay millions of dollars for it. And furthermore, if we bought them out, then it would cost more to do that than it would to keep the system that is in place right now. Overall, I do support more choice and freedom in the agricultural sector. That's why I was a part of the Harper government that got rid of the wheat board and unleashed the productivity of our grains in our Western Prairie provinces. And I'll also be reducing other taxes and simplifying regulations so that our farmers and ranchers can spend more time producing nutritious food and less time filling out paperwork and being hounded by government bureaucrats.
Great. So in your campaign, do you plan on coming out west to Alberta pretty soon?
I do. I should point out I was already in Saskatchewan, the province of my parents' birth. My folks are from Saskatoon and Leoville in Saskatchewan. So I visited there. And of course, I'm from Calgary, as you know. I'm born and raised there. My folks still live there. So I'm going to be back to visit them and connect with my many Western family and friends in the great province of Alberta. And I'll make sure you know about it when I have a date nailed down.
Great. Thanks. Well, I hope we'll get the opportunity to talk when you do come out here. Is there anything else you'd add before I let you go?
Well, whenever someone comes to my office for a job, I always ask them, why do you want the job? So I have to answer that question myself. I want to be Prime Minister to put you and every Canadian back in control of their own lives by making Canada the freest nation on earth. That's my purpose. That's what I've always believed, and that's why I'm in this.
Well, thank you very much for joining me today, Mr. Poilievre, and we'll be watching your campaign with interest.
Thank you for having me.
Right, so I know there was a lot more questions for Mr. Poilievre. I'm afraid I only had him for 15 minutes there. We squeezed in what we could. He doesn't drag out the answers as long as I remember before talking to Premier Kenney. Actually, in a half-hour interview with him, I only managed to get through 4. But on the bright side, it sounds like we should be able to talk to Mr. Poilievre at least 2 or 3 more times before the leadership race comes in September 10th. And I do want to cover everything. So we're reaching out to other leadership candidates, and we want to get them on the show. We want to talk. We want to keep this discourse and debate going as we lead up to it. And that was Pierre Poilievre helping kick things off with it. And myself, just I mean, I'm a opinion person. I've got my views and opinions, absolutely. But at the same time, I don't have a political membership anymore. I haven't for a couple of years now, though I did for most of the rest of my other parts of my life. I'm not going to be voting in this race. There'll certainly be people I prefer over others. And I certainly like Mr. Poilievre, but I'm going to try and maintain balance as well as I can to a degree and hear from everybody on it, because that's important. I noticed a couple of things in the comments, though, and there's a couple of things I want to be fair with Mr. Poilievre about. And that's, for one, we talked about that before with the World Economic Forum thing. That was very directly addressed by Andrew Lawton. It's the reason I wasn't going to go into it. You can look it up. He's with True North. He's great. And Pierre sat down with him the other day, and maybe you don't believe him or maybe you will, but Mr. Poilievre made it clear he's never been to Davos. He has nothing to do with the World Economic Forum whatsoever, and doesn't support any of the goals that they have. It has been addressed anyways. The other thing is that net worth thing that keeps coming up, with people saying he's worth $8 million, he's worth $9 million. I have no idea what he's worth, but I'm afraid, aside from him and his own accountant, nobody really does. The thing about Mr. Poilievre's net worth is from one of those online sites for celebrities and people of profile. So there's actually one of mine out there, apparently, and there it is. There's my net worth on this celebrity wiki or whatever else. It has me on there. They got my birth year right and a number of other things about me on that site, but they also said I'm worth $1 to $5 million. Guys, I hate to say it, but I'm not worth $1 to $5 million. I wish I was. And hey, compensation here at the Standard is good and it's fair, but I assure you it's not bringing us up to quite those net worth levels. We're going to have to sell a heck of a lot more subscriptions before I could convince Derek of such a raise. But it does show, if you're getting your information on some people from sites like that, guys, they're completely inaccurate. They aren't true. Mr. Poilievre might be worth $9 million. He might be worth $100 million. He might be worth $100. I don't know, but don't rely on those sites. It's inaccurate. And if you're going to oppose them, fair enough, but let's do it on the policies, not some of the online rumor mill, unfortunately, that's out there. So now let's see. One of the questions that didn't get covered, unfortunately, and time ran out, was his vote on the Quebec extra seat, protecting their seat over there in Quebec. And he abstained. He didn't vote for or against. It's unfortunate. I'd rather he had taken a strong stand, because it was a very anti-democratic motion on the part, of course, of the Bloc Québécois and the rest of many conservatives voting for it, and the Liberals and NDP, of course, doing so in the Bloc. But, when you're running federally, they always have to tiptoe around Quebec, whether, that's a good idea or not. I'm certain a lot of the Western viewers do not agree. So all the same, Pierre, I'd rather he voted in that sense on that. Likewise with the supply management, that's what I asked, and somebody else expressed. I was disappointed with that. That was, for those who remember, a very big issue in the Conservative leadership back with Andrew Scheer when he ran against Maxime Bernier. And the dairy lobby, is incredibly strong in Canada with that wretched supply management policy. And they basically, it was a 1% difference. That's why the party got so badly split between Bernier and Scheer, because Scheer catered to the supply management, the dairy cartels, and Bernier wouldn't, and that gave him that edge to get out and win that race. For those unfamiliar with it, supply management, it's an old policy. I call it a Soviet-style policy, and it really is one. Sorry, just a side note before the question goes on the scroll. Cheryl was saying his stance on lifting travel mandates. I didn't ask him that, but I believe he's already said that he wants them all lifted. I'm pretty sure. If you look that up, he's already said that. Either way, supply management is I like using the analogy. I've talked about it on the show before. My wife, Jane, grew up on a dairy farm in Rockyford. Her father, this thing controls everything you can produce, how much you can sell, and what you can sell. It's illegal if you sell some agricultural products without a government quota. So he had some dairy cows, just a small operation. But he only had a quota for cream. So they milk the cows, you get the cream, you send it off, you sell it, you make a few bucks for the household, you feed the family as much milk as you can, and the rest gets poured into a ditch. Some places where they had pigs, they feed the pigs with it. But it was illegal to sell anything you didn't have a quota for. Illegal. That's ridiculous. Chickens, I own 8 of those things at home just as a hobby. But, it's illegal to own more than 300 chickens if you don't have a quota. The government fully controls the price. And, they've talked about that policy as well, and proponents of it. They say, it protects the small farm. Oh, that's a load of crap. The stats are out there. There was actually a former Liberal, and her name's escaping me right now, a federal Liberal. She did some great work on supply management and breaking it down. And if you look at the history, they say it protects the small family farm. It's been the complete opposite. There's no much such thing as small little dairy operations anymore. They're monstrous ones. and they are big operations. And guess what? Most of them are in Quebec. That's why nobody wants to touch those things. Of course, again, it comes down to that being terrified of Quebec voters and they don't want to stir them up. Mr. Poilievre was right when he talked about it with, you can't just shut it down. You're going to open yourself. I know our government's not afraid of shutting down people's livelihoods on a whim, but theoretically, if we had a more principled government, those quotas, technically what they turn into is assets. I mean, they're worth something. A lot of these farmers actually had to spend a whole pile of money to buy those quotas and get a return on them. And if you suddenly just cut them out, you're going to open yourself to a bunch of lawsuits and you're going to do a lot of damage to the market. But we can't pretend this hasn't been done before. New Zealand and Australia had the same supply management policies as Canada does right now. They got rid of them long ago. And they did have to spend money. They had to spend a lot to buy out those quotas and compensate those farmers as they shifted the system. But I don't agree with Mr. Poilievre when he said it would cost more, perhaps in the short term. But in the long run, no, their industries are doing much, much better. They're exporting a lot more product. Supply management has also harmed us a lot. Maybe even in the future interview, I'd like to talk more with Mr. Poilievre about that. I'll talk to other candidates about it. It really hurts us a lot with our exports. It's one of the biggest sticking points we have when we talk about trade between the United States and Canada. And they point out that we're subsidizing the heck out of our milk and so on. The Americans subsidize it too, but it's more direct subsidies. It's a self-defeating battle. You know, it's a race to the bottom when you get in subsidy wars with each other. But of course, you see, when you're fighting over something else, whether it's aluminum imports or softwood lumber or anything else, then you can start bringing up some of those other thorns in your side and problems such as the supply management, and it brings about bigger fights going on. When supply management's removed, such as in New Zealand and Australia, the dairy producers expand and they get more creative. Not only do consumers get a better price, there's the other thing. It's been shown everybody's paying hundreds and hundreds of dollars a year extra for your dairy, your chicken, turkey, all of those things that are supply managed. You pay a premium in Canada. Anybody who's gone to the States, you see dairy products are way cheaper than here. Why is that? Because of our supply management program. In New Zealand and that, suddenly these farmers had to compete. Suddenly these producers have to compete. So what did they do? They got better at it. They've opened up new export markets. They've, cheeses, things that can export better. And dairy products can export actually a fair amount nowadays, these days. I mean, a little bit of the reason the old supply management, the policies, those came out when refrigeration wasn't that good. When you had to have local dairy producers, chicken producers in order to keep those supplies local and safe. I mean, there were worries about supply running out in times of crisis and things like that. But the time is long gone. We don't need that. You can have producers ship their products a long ways and have it perfectly safe and consumable by consumers. So it's unfortunate, though, with that strong dairy lobby. It doesn't seem to matter how conservative a politician is. They are terrified of taking on the dairy cartels in Quebec with supply management. But I'm going to be sure to keep hitting all of the other candidates as we get them on that question. I fear I'm not going to get much different answers out of them. It was Bobby Podiak saying chicken and dairy in Australia is way lower than here, and she lived there for 3.5 years. That would be the only thing's cheaper in Australia than here. But I mean, I can believe it if you got rid of the supply management. I mean, I remember the beer down there. The last time I was there, I still was drinking, and restaurants and food, and there wasn't much cheap in Australia. Renting a car, man, it almost bankrupt you. But the dairy and so on, they get rid of the supply management. The consumers win. So either way, we'll move on beyond Mr. Poilievre's interview there and cover a little more stuff here. Let's see. So again, getting back to City Hall, let's come back to that Freedom Rally. It was just such a hornet's nest yesterday. And as I said, I'm going to have a counselor coming on, Dan McLean, to talk about that on Friday. He was one of the only ones voting against the city members on getting them to try and pressure the police to intervene there. And the council only wants to hear the perspective of Beltline residents and not the protesters, some councillors made clear in a special meeting. And Councillor Jennifer Wyness, and she's one of the union-supported councillors, very left of center, but she wanted to hold a public hearing on the demonstration. She wanted to do something that Trudeau refused to do in the protests. De-escalate. Listen. You don't have to agree with them. Just listen. And she got shot down. She got eviscerated. It turned into a horrible fight in council. Jerks like Cory, and he is a jerk, was basically, we're not making room to hear from hatred and racists and all. Guys, again, I'm sick of that narrative. You don't have to agree with the protests. It's fair enough. You don't have to agree with it, even their cause when it comes to the health mandates and things like that. But quit spreading that baloney that it's race-based. It has nothing to do with race. Nothing. Nothing. It's a cheap, shallow political tactic to try and shut something down you don't like. And they did that in council. And, you know, we saw some reason out of Jennifer Wyness, Councillor Wyness, to try and at least say, let's talk to them and listen to them before we start moving in on action. What a crazy concept, eh? Respecting them, just respecting them as citizens and having that ability to protest. Well, that was shot right down. She pulled her motion off the table after basically a humiliating attack from other councillors, such as the two Courtneys and Cara and other people. It's ridiculous. And, you know, again, if this situation gets inflamed, just as with Trudeau, these things could have been de-escalated long before if the governments in power just showed some respect for their citizens and listened. It doesn't mean they have to agree with them. It doesn't mean they have to comply with their demands, but just show some respect and listen. And I tell you what, there's a lot less chance that things are going to go off the rails down the road. But Calgary seems to be heading towards a conflict, and I'm worried about that. And it's quite a concern. I'm going to talk one more time about Bitcoin Well before we get out of here. Let us not forget those guys are a fantastic local service here in Alberta. They have the white glove service, and they have they lead you into the world of digital currency so you can safely invest and take care of your money. I talked about it before. We've worked with them. They've got corporate packages here at the Western Standard. A portion of my check, and yeah, no, it's not that 1 to 5 million that I supposedly have, but a portion of my check always goes into my Bitcoin wallet now, and it's matched by the Western Standard. It's a neat savings program. Bitcoin Well sets all that up between you and your employer. So if your employer wants to do something, that it's voluntary for the employee. It's something they can get going for you. And they have that Bitcoin Academy, as Nico's pulled the picture up. So you're going to get these online symposiums, and they're partnered with Athabasca University on it. So you can learn about it and find out exactly what this is. What's making this buzz with digital currencies? Is it for you? Bitcoin Well, and there it is, Bitcoin for Beginners. They'll help show you how to get involved in investing in it if you choose to, and how to safely control your money. And so on a similar line, so I'm going to talk about my guests for tomorrow. We've got Kalea Carrington. I could be ruining her first name. And she's going to talk about the upcoming Alberta Technology Symposium. And it's a big one coming up. And it's going to be going a lot into not just technology, but blockchain and digital currencies. Again, that confusing world, but it's getting so big and important right now. Expanding on it and discussing it's going to be great. And then Matthew Horwood, he's our other new reporter in Ottawa. I was talking to Rachel the other day, and we're going to talk to Matthew about what he's been working on there, because the Standard is really expanding, and it's important to keep, you know, talking about these people we've got. Plus, I'm going to have Brian Jean come in, and I'm certain that's going to be very interesting. I'd heard he's got some more stuff to announce tomorrow. He's coming out guns blazing after winning that by-election last night in Fort McMurray-Lac la Biche. So make sure to tune in to catch all of that stuff tomorrow, 11:30 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. Get your questions in, get talking, and it's going to be a great show. Thanks for tuning in today, guys.